Hello, this is Dr. James Rivera, and this lecture is about ethos, one of the three persuasive appeals that we're studying in ENC 1101 as part of rhetorical analysis. It's the first of the three. The other two are pathos and logos. Today's study of ethos is focused on what a speaker or a writer has to do to earn the trust of his or her audience. So it's about trustworthiness. And the two main components of ethos involves the speaker's perception of his or her audience, understanding audience. And we're going to review that separately later. And what we're going to cover today is the audience's perception of the speaker. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint and walk us through it, and then we'll go from there. So as you recall, ethos is one of the three rhetorical appeals, and rhetoric is finding the available means of persuasion. And as I just said, that ethos establishes the trustworthiness of the speaker's character or the writers based upon the speaker's perception of his or her audience. And we're going to go into that in a lot of detail later in the course. And then the audience's perception of the speaker. And that's what we're going to focus on today. And there are generally three sources of that: virtue, intelligence, and goodwill. Those were the three identified by Aristotle in the rhetoric. And, you know, as you should recall, all of this comes from book 3 of Aristotle's Rhetoric. But we're going to add some to Aristotle too, because of course the study of rhetoric has progressed somewhat over the last 2,300 years. So ethos basically means moral character, reflected in deliberate choice of actions, and has developed into a habit of mind. Okay, that's just ethos in a general sense. And you might think about ethos as being related to ethics. It's the Greek root word from which the English word ethics comes. And this takes on a few different implications in rhetoric. So first are the individual qualities of the speaker, who the audience knows you as the speaker or the writer to be. Okay, so people studying rhetoric today, they call this situated ethos. The speaker who is introduced to the room as a recognized expert on a subject has a high degree of situated ethos. So whenever you listen to someone being introduced, and the person introducing the speaker talks them up and goes on and on and on about everything they are and everything they've done, they're trying to establish a situated ethos. Okay, and the second part of ethos is the impression made upon the audience during the speech or in the course of the writing of the speaker or writer. Okay, and this is called invented ethos today. So the first is situated ethos, and it has to do with the reputation a person has, or the impression a person has already made before they even start to speak or write. And the second is the impression that a person makes through their speaking and writing. So the first is situated ethos, and the second is invented ethos. All right. And there are three sources for invented ethos in Aristotle. All right. The first is intelligence or practical wisdom. It can begin with just demonstrating common sense or useful knowledge or sound knowledge of the world. You just know how things work. But in academic circles, this is especially important as you display knowledge of your subject. So as you recall from summary writing, you know, the whole purpose of writing a good summary is showing people that you've done the reading and that you can reason about it fairly and that you understand it. And that earns trust in the sense of intelligence as a part of invented ethos. And next is virtue. Now, Aristotle describes many virtues in Book 2 of the Rhetoric, but you need to consider what your audience considers virtuous. Okay, and that's going to vary from audience to audience. it's not so much that these different groups of people have these widely different um, ways of reasoning morally. I think for the most part, we really don't reason morally from each other that much. Um, but when it comes to the specifics, we certainly have differences of opinion. So you need to know how your audience reasons morally about the given topic, and you need to appeal to them in that way. And finally, goodwill. You could consider this also a part of pathos, which are emotional appeals, which will be coming up next. But goodwill as a part of ethos means your audience perceives you as someone genuinely concerned for their best interests. Okay. And that's very important. Now, think about these three as ways of gaining people's trust. Okay. People will trust you if they think you know what you're talking about. People will trust you if they think you reason ethically the same way they do. And people will trust you if they think you care about them. So when you're doing an analysis for ethos, these are three of the things you want to identify in whatever speech or whatever piece of writing you're analyzing for ethos. How does the person presenting themselves, the person or persons presenting themselves, display intelligence? How do they display virtue? How do they display goodwill? And the other thing I want you to think about here is I want you to not think about an author or a speaker putting these into their speech like they're added ingredients. These are inherent parts of their self presentation. Okay. And what you are doing is like in your analysis, you're reading or listening to this text and you are analyzing it for these three things. So these questions, how do they demonstrate intelligence? How do they demonstrate virtue? How do they demonstrate goodwill? They're like filters or lenses through which you're viewing the speech. So you're the one providing the analytical categories and applying them to the speaker. And the speaker or the writer, in many cases, may be displaying or failing to display these intentionally or unintentionally, but it's not necessarily something like an added ingredient or that's put in. It's an inherent part of a speaker or writer's self-presentation, and you're trying to identify those elements in it. You know, you're the one applying the filter, you're the one doing the analysis. All right. So these aren't external things, these are internal to all forms of communication. Okay. Now, later on, people who studied rhetoric came to identify some other important dimensions of the speaker's character that makes them more persuasive. And one is composure. If a speaker or a writer seems in control of themselves emotionally, they will appear to be more trustworthy. But if they're out of control, if their emotions aren't in control, if they're rambling or stammering or talking too quickly, if they're too angry or if they're rude or disrespectful, or if they're too emotional in any way, even positive way, if they're trying too hard to be funny, if they're being funny at inappropriate moments, that causes people to lose trust in the speaker. But if they're self-contained or self-controlled, and if they control the emotions that they allow themselves to reveal in their writing or in their speech, then they tend to be more trustworthy. And next is sociability. Does the speaker or the writer seem friendly and have a pleasant quality about him or her? That tends to win trust, and so does extroversion. Is the speaker outgoing, active, and talkative? And I think the last two apply even more to speaking situations than writing ones, but you can certainly communicate all three through your writing as well as your speaking. All right, so what I'm wanting you to do now with your discussion forum this week is analyze the text I provide for you on all these 6 points. Intelligence, does the speaker sound like he or she knows what he or she is talking about? Virtue, does the speaker reason morally the same way as his or her audience? Goodwill, does the speaker sound like he or she cares about his or her audience? And then composure, is the speaker controlling himself or herself? And then sociability, does the speaker or the writer, and it could be a written text, does the speaker or the writer sound friendly and warm toward their audience at least? And then extroversion, are they active and talkative and engaging? Okay, so I want you to analyze your the written text, practice ethos analysis on the written text this week. And at the end, when you do your rhetorical analysis paper, you're going to analyze your chosen piece of writing for these qualities. Okay, that's it. And if you have any questions, be sure to email me.